tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
We're going to shift gears here a bit. I want to bring in my very good friend and fellow, I don't even know, independent media guy, just seems too trite, but I'll say independent media titan, Aaron Gunn, who hails from the West Coast. Aaron, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Great to chat with you as well, Andrew. It's great to be here.
So just on I want to get to your documentary, Vancouver is Dying, in just a moment, but you're a BC guy. And I think oftentimes BC gets very misunderstood by the rest of Canada because you really have two provinces there. You've got Vancouver and then you've got the rest of British Columbia, and the political culture is very different. But a lot of people forget the convoy originated in Delta, BC, and obviously more people joined in Alberta, Saskatchewan, but it was a very key part of this. And I was wondering just how that story in BC has unfolded outside of like the downtown Vancouver bubble.
Yeah, well, BC, I mean, you mentioned it's two provinces in one. It's arguably three or four, I suppose. You got the interior, you got Vancouver Island. And then to your point, where it started in Delta there, yeah, I think there's been a lot. BC is a weird place because we've had some of the most repressive vaccine mandates in the country, but also had some of the most relaxed other COVID restrictions, I guess you might call. I remember in Ontario, you guys were shutting down restaurants, and for the most part, everything in BC was pretty relaxed. So it's kind of a two-faced approach here in BC. But I think it's, for the most part, this was a Canadian story, and what was happening in BC was happening in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, Quebec, obviously, Atlantic Canada. So I don't think there's anything specific to BC, just the same sort of thing that was happening everywhere else.
One of the stories, I think, of the pandemic, which has not been fully explored yet, I think more and more people are starting to talk about it, is how the lockdowns, the get to COVID zero cases, exacerbated all of these other issues. I mean, we've heard anecdotally, and there's been some data about this, of drug overdoses, suicides, mental health, domestic violence. A lot of these issues, I mean, specifically on drugs, are very real issues in BC. And I was wondering if you could speak in general and in Vancouver specifically about whether these things have just gotten worse because they've always been getting worse in the last few years, or whether you think there is a connection between that trend and the lockdown issues that we've seen elsewhere.
I think the lockdowns basically poured fuel on the fire. So it was already bad. The policies that the government were pursuing were making the problem worse. And then the lockdowns, the impact of reduced government services, and also just a feeling of isolation, I think, for a lot of people, I think exacerbated that problem that was already bad and was already getting worse. So we can see now that COVID's over, the drug overdoses are still there. So I think if that makes sense, you had a fire that was already burning, and government policies during COVID just threw a whole bunch of gasoline on top of it.
Let's take a look at the trailer for Vancouver is Dying.
People are afraid in Vancouver. You shouldn't have to walk down the street looking over your shoulder, but that's the way it is now.
You just kind of get used to this being part of what it means to be a Vancouverite. This isn't normal, and this is actually something wrong, and that we should hold our political leaders accountable for presiding over something that is clearly not okay.
We had a good city in the 90s. What the f happened, man?
What is happening to Vancouver? One of the wealthiest and most naturally beautiful cities in all of North America has been beset by skyrocketing crime, violent attacks, and a crippling battle with addiction that's literally left thousands of people dead. But what is at the root of all these problems? Do police have the tools they need to do their jobs? Are violent offenders being released with little to no regard for public safety? And has an ideological obsession with so-called safe supply and free drugs overshadowed the desperate need for treatment, recovery, and rehabilitation?
Harm reduction. Somebody's got a sense of humor, man. Because that shit ain't helping nobody, man. It's helping everybody get high more.
Everywhere you look that this stuff has taken hold significantly, the cities have become destroyed.
My name is Aaron Gunn, and this is Politics Explained.
The whole thing is incredibly well done, not just the trailer, but I think the trailer gives people a sense of it. It's made, I think, a pretty significant impact already. I think you had the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, share it just a couple of days ago. Let me ask you, first off, why you did this and what the overarching message is of it.
Well, I think like some of the other journalism I do in this series specifically, it was an issue that confounded me, and I wanted to know why, as someone who's lived in British Columbia, coastal BC especially, over the past 20 years, and watched as this problem has gotten worse and worse. Homelessness, drug overdoses up from when the problem was supposed to be bad 20 years ago, 150 deaths per year, now up to over 2,000. What's going on? Why are we pumping more and more money at this problem and nothing is getting better? And then you saw the one of the side effects of this, or the symptoms, with crime has just absolutely been exploding here. There's 4 violent random stranger attacks every day on the streets of Vancouver, where random people are just getting attacked. This isn't gang related or anything like this. So what is happening? And trying to kind of peel back the curtain and look past some of the kind of the same mainstream media talking points and figure out what's actually going on. And like you said, it's just it's been explosive, and I think it's getting close to 2 million views now. Although one thing that we can take away, which was great, a week and a half after we released it, the municipal elections were held here in BC. And going into it, the incumbent mayor, who we were very critical of, was about tied in the polls, and he ended up losing by about 20 points. So we'd like to think the video played a little bit of an impact on that result.
Yeah, it's always good to get results in such a clear and rooted in metrics way. I will ask you about the drug thing specifically here, because I know in a lot of cases it's very ideological for people. It's never been in my experience where folks discuss this in terms of what's the best way to deal with this crisis. You have people that very much are part of this permissive, ignore the criminal law. They use terms like harm reduction approach. And then you have other people that are the more traditional law and order types. Are you still seeing that on left-right lines, or is it starting to change? Because I think it's very difficult to take the abstract, no, we need to give these people what they want attitude when your car is getting broken into, when your business is being broken into. And I've seen it on a smaller scale in my own city, London, which has a very significant and growing drug problem. And I'm curious if it's shifting in Vancouver.
That there is a growing realization, which is why I think the video has resonated in the way it has, that what we're doing now isn't working. I think that is the consensus that is forming. And also, I think moving away from, I think what some of those who are big proponents of harm reduction always try to paint this picture of a binary choice between like the war on drugs, where you're throwing people who are using drugs in jail versus what they're doing, and that's just not the case. There's lots of countries in the world that have taken different approaches. Just because you're not throwing people in jail, for simple possession, doesn't mean that the solution has to be we're now just handing out free drugs. There's a case in Vancouver where they were putting basically heroin in vending machines to supply the drug addictions of these people. And I think the other point, I just wanted to go back to your first question of what really got me into this, was there's a big marketing push in British Columbia, and I think it's happening in other provinces as well, about stigma, about, this problem is all to do with stigma. We need to destigmatize the situation. And when you drive down the streets of Vancouver, Victoria, and you see people lying here and just dying en masse and overdosing en masse, it's not because of stigma. It's not that there's too much stigma on drugs has somehow led to people using drugs and dying. It doesn't even make any sense. So really exploring this topic and trying to get to the bottom of it was, I think, important.
I remember when I first went to San Francisco a few years back, I had seen the conservative parody of San Francisco online, of like people defecating on streets and homeless people in every corner and I was like, okay, yeah, whatever. And then I went there and it was exactly as I had been told. Like the parody was real, and it was actually quite upsetting because I had seen, you know, old photos and videos of San Francisco looking like a wonderful place, and it is just geographically a beautiful place. And Vancouver's very similar, and I don't know if you'd say Vancouver is worse or better than San Francisco, or if it's even a necessary comparison, but it's a city that has so much. Like, it's a beautiful city. It's got culture, it's got dining, it's got the ocean, but it's also a city that is just like a hellscape in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of parallels on the west coast of the United States with what's happening on the west coast of Canada. British Columbia is actually a significantly higher death rate from overdoses than say Washington State or California. So the problem is very acute here, and the permissiveness around drugs, handing out free drugs. I mean, if you ask the people in Vancouver that are pushing these policies, they would say that they are at the vanguard of kind of progressive drug policy in North America. And I would argue that the vanguard of disastrous drug policy, but they certainly are the ones that are pushing the limits the most. And this started, if you go back to, I think it's 2002, where Insight opened the first safe injection site in North America where people were allowed to go and shoot up illicit drugs. And ever since that point, it seems to me that as the results keep getting worse and worse and worse, their response is always that it's just because we haven't gone far enough. And it's just amazing when you contrast that with other countries in Europe, like Portugal and Sweden and others who have taken dramatically different approaches with way better results. And yet it's so ideological here in British Columbia. And it's sad to see the results. And I mean, it's not surprising you see the left do this on other issues as well, where it becomes almost like this religious like devotion to ideology that to the point of which you just ignore things that are happening right in front of your face, which is, I mean, downtown Vancouver. You know, you'd have to. It's amazing. You can see it visually in front of you, the results of these failed policies.
I will say it's very inconvenient for libertarians like me who would say, in theory, yes, legalize all drugs. You know, if you use drug, it harms only you, not other people. Therefore, it's like smoking. It's like if you do it on your own and it hurts you, it's no one else's problem. What's your response? Because I know you and I see eye to eye on a lot of issues. So how do you respond to that? Why does the libertarian fantasy break down in reality?
Well, so there's a couple. I mean, there's the drug issue, there's the criminal justice issue. I mean, this documentary covers a lot of it. But part of the problem is that these people develop drug addictions. These drug addictions cost a lot of money to maintain. You obviously can't be when you're perpetually high, you can't maintain a job or whatever. So you resort to crime. It usually begins with petty crime. And right now, I interviewed the head of the police union and police officers who, you know, they arrest the same person for the exact same crime twice in 24-hour periods repeatedly. Like they'd arrest them.
The literal revolving door.
The literal revolving door. They get put in prison. They're released on a promise to appear. They go and commit the exact same crime, and the cop, just by happenstance, ends up arresting them again. So the criminal justice system, the fact is a big part of this problem as well. What I would say with addiction and libertarianism is, I mean, I kind of view it as a parallel of if you wouldn't allow, at least I think most versions of libertarianism wouldn't allow for slavery, like the right of somebody to basically sell themselves into slavery. And I think with these hard drugs, like are talking crystal meth and heroin and these kinds of things, eventually these people basically lose the ability to act rationally, to process kind of the look out for their own best interests, make as the addicts that I interviewed would talk about, they would commit crimes and do things that morally they would never have otherwise done or were never raised. It just becomes your sole focus in life is achieving the next high, and everything ends up revolving around that. And I just don't think that's something that is really sustainable in a free and open society. I think there should be as few rules as possible, but we still need certain rules, or else things descend into chaos and anarchy like we're seeing in parts of Vancouver.
Where can people watch the documentary?
People can watch the documentary on YouTube. So you can type in Vancouver is Dying on YouTube, and it should pop up, or you can visit my channel, which is youtube.com/Aaron Gunn BC.
And you should definitely give Aaron a follow on YouTube anyway. But do check out the documentary. It's a great one. Aaron Gunn, great to see you as always. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.